All right. Hey, everybody. So very briefly from my side, Alex, for those of you who didn't meet me for the past few days, I've been around in Melbourne. I'm from Kels. We haven't been here for quite a while. We decided to actually put something together for you here in Melbourne, and we're gonna do something similar in Sydney as well. Like it's been kind of hard out of Bulgaria, Sofia, where we're based, to actually organize something like that. So we had a lot of help from our partners at Digistor and StormFX. And we actually have Pete here from StormFX today, and Darren is somewhere around as well. Those guys have been great help. Also, Katrina and Mark from Storm and from Digistore, from the marketing team, who actually put a lot of effort to book everything, set up everything, get Darren and Pete here as well to help me out and held my hand throughout this whole time. But enough about this. So us not being here for quite a while, actually, we're thinking we should probably do something different to what we've been doing before, which always been V-Ray days or something like very specifically tailored to our products and demonstrations and masterclass and whatnot. Something that could further contribute to actually what's been going on for the last 5 years. We haven't been around physically here, so it's more of a discussion on evolving technology, and we wanted to put that into the context of AEC and architectural visualization, which is our sphere here. And but enough about this. I just want to welcome you again and to thank our guest speakers that are here today, and also our moderator Chris Needham, who is gonna take it over, and kick it off.
Thank you very much. Did well. Good opening. So for anybody who's wondering, I'm not managing Bitcoin whilst I'm on my phone. I'm just referring to notes because I didn't print up a hard copy. So I would like to first begin by introducing our speakers, our esteemed speakers today. We have Mr. Daniel Flood from FloodSlicer. We have Andrei Dolnikov from Binyan Studios. And we have Chris Pinn down the end from Lang O'Rourke. And we have Costa Gabriel from Gabriel Saunders. I will leave them, if they like, just to introduce themselves a little bit. I'm not sure how familiar you in the audience are with these esteemed speakers. I know a couple of them, and I've only met a couple of them sort of yesterday, today, but they're certainly very highly esteemed in this industry. For myself, I'm in the industry. I'm somewhat industry adjacent. My background was in architecture many years ago, and now I find myself doing sort of digital advisory type work. I think I am qualified to be on the panel, though, purely on the basis that I did once play with ChatGPT and try and write myself a children's book. I also used Midjourney to come up with some images, and I realised that actually without a really effective, knowledgeable, sort of skilled driver of the technology, it wasn't a secret sauce, it wasn't the panacea to everything. That was my initial take on it that I was learning firsthand. The other thing I wanted to do is just as a bit of an icebreaker, is we were chatting just before this morning, we realised, and I'm not sure about you, Chris, you have to surprise me on this, we all had something in common to do with the Opera House. So I spent a couple of years working on the Opera House, and one of the things about that as one fantastic piece of architecture was that if you've been working there long enough, apparently it's quite the phenomenon that you might wake up after a nightmare that the building was destroyed. And I mentioned that to my client at the time. He said, yes, welcome to the club. And so ever since then, whenever I've seen Hollywood movies where the building gets destroyed, I start to get a bit weepy. Daniel, what was your anecdote about the Opera House?
Well, I've got many, but no. My most recent one was my brother had a solo tenor performance there, which I slept through.
As a brother should, right?
Until one of the other partners in the company's mother, who I've known since I was 4, elbowed me in the head, and I woke up for the last 2 notes. So anyway, I've seen it in recording, but that's my most recent one anyway.
Yep.
And some of the most amazing performances, like Neil's from last year and other things like that. So no, it's an amazing place, and it's one of the few. There are a few things you walk around the world, and as an architect myself, and as your eyes open to this stuff over time, and it does, because I remember going as a student to, say, Europe and seeing the buildings and looking at it a certain way as like a big icon element, or then how you understand texture over time. was I remember going to Bilbao in about, I don't know, 2005 or something like that. I turned around the corner and saw it there, and I thought, wow, that building's amazing. And I thought that just jumps out at you as a moment, and apart from the fact it sort of disturbs the idea of its own exhibitions, is that I thought, well, there's nothing else really like that, until I then flew back to Sydney, walked around the corner and saw the Opera House, and I thought, well, that's timelessness as a form in a building. And so that's probably the best thing I'd say about the Opera House.
Yep,
so,
yep.
Yeah, it is
I'll go to
amazing.
Andre next for the next anecdote. Andre, what were you saying about the Opera House?
I have been within the belly of the beast. I was a bartender at the Opera House around the time of the Sydney Olympics, while that was, I think, one of my first jobs after school. Serving drinks. There was you did get to go. You did get to go for free to any performance you want if there's seats. So I did go to quite a lot of symphonies and classical music. But there was so we all wore white tops as the staff that liked to pilot champagne, and there was the opera bar, which was the exclusive, the little mini opera. You know, there's like the big structure and the little one, and you had to wear a black top, and you had to be really like a posh waiter. And I was never ever asked to work in the the Ben Long restaurant, right? So that is an ambition unfulfilled.
Very nice. And Chris, very quickly, do you have any anecdote about the Opera House by chance?
So for me, I guess it goes back to I spent 27 years of my life or sins working for Arup, who obviously designed the structure of the Opera House. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's been a big part of my career, just being part of Arup in that sense. But when I was in Singapore back in the 2000s, when I was first getting into the whole building information modelling thing, Arup were commissioned by the Opera House to develop the first 3D model of it from the existing drawings and scans at that point. So in terms of technology changing the industry, I've been at it for a long time, and that was one of my first experiences of it. So.
Yep. And I've been saving Costa for last because
Thanks.
he's got the best anecdote about the Opera House.
I do. I've never been to the Opera House, and for someone that absolutely loves architecture, love exploring and traveling the world and looking at buildings and touching buildings and looking at materiality, I haven't experienced it yet. But I think that's also partly because I grew up on a Greek island. I'm still traveling. I'm still learning and exploring the world. So it's just one part of Sydney I haven't seen yet.
So it's probably not a bad segue, because one of the images that's foremost in my mind about the Opera House specifically is also seeing all the temporary works during construction, and the fact that, of course, it went, 9 years over budget or something, and 1,400% over budget. But thinking about how technology today, if it was available back then, would have impacted the design or the construction. Now, in short, I don't know that it would be particularly profoundly different. It might have been done more efficiently, but the building still would have been built anyhow. And Chris, you and I were talking just a little bit earlier about the impact of technology in our industry today. And when I say our industry, I want to be specific, say architecture, engineering, construction, including any creative space, marketing, visuals, everything that sells and communicates visions and so forth. What's your take on it initially? And I wanted to set two rules in place. One is I've encouraged each of the speakers to not shy away from disagreement, because furious agreement is boring. But if we get you guys leaning forward in your chairs because you think there might be some fists thrown, then that's pretty engaging, right? And I've been told actually that both Andre and Daniel will talk at opposites until the cows come home. So that fuels this. This is really good.
We had it coming together over there, so we're fine.
It was a beautiful moment. I was there to witness it.
It's all right.
So Chris, just take us off on the comment you were making before. I think it was somewhat cynical, but also trying to ground yourself in reality, wasn't it?
Oh, I think that I'm still working in the industry, right? So and as I said, I started my journey in terms of technology, really looking at how technology could improve what we do. After spending best part of 3 years coordinating services in an underground metro in Singapore manually in 2D CAD, I swore I'd never do it that way again, and I never have done it that way again. But trying to take the industry on that same journey and philosophy is I'm still here 20 years later, still trying to drive that same change, right? So the technology is just part of the solution. You often hear the phrase people, process and technology, and it's not uncommon to know that people are the the difficult part of those three, right? So I think the thing that we get wrong as an industry is we focus so much on the technology, we forget how important it is to bring the people on the journey. And that means everybody. So a group of, you know, I'm currently the digital lead on a part of the North East Link project, and the challenge for me there is not which technology we implement, it's how do I make sure or bring that 700 people in that alliance on that journey with me. So it's them that are using the technology, not my digital team. And that's, for me, that's the failing of industry. We still focus on core groups of experts and technology experts to deliver the wow and the advancements, whilst everybody else is still going on doing what they have always done.
Andre, do you have any take on that? Do you differ from that? You found anything different in results on your side of things?
What was the question?
The principal question about
intently, but
technology's impact on our industry and so forth.
Technology impact
yes,
on the industry.
Yes. So obviously there's different levels of impact and at different times with different technologies, but what's your general take to start us off?
I mean, it's so hard, like, those two things are so intertwined, it's very difficult to think of them as separate. I think, as was being said here, you know, it's the interrelationship between them that is most important. It's not like one impacting the other. They're inherently, you know, married together. I think my view on, I mean, our industry, the sort of niche that we're in, only exists in the way it is because of that technology. So it's such a huge enabler of people's careers, the creativity they're able to do. On the other hand, it's constantly also seen as like a threat, as a potentially we're going to get to that point, right? Like a disruption, a threat. So this constant thing, the job that I have, the business that I have is only there because of this tech, but then the next bit of tech is going to make me irrelevant, or this irrelevant, or our market, you know. So I think there's a kind of anxious relationship between the two, and I think the challenge for both individuals and companies is how to like navigate the exciting bits positively and not be overwhelmed by the anxiety, because I could see that even in the team, like even on, you know, the internal chats. There's like literally people are concerned, and in our case, you know, I actually haven't made like a statement like the CEO memo about AI. It is this and not that, like, and then I'm like, that's bad. I should, because like doubt is the worst. Doubt is the true enemy. Nothing is, what is it? Nothing to fear other than fear itself. Versus like, say, whatever you say today will probably guaranteed to be 100% wrong in a year from now. So that's a little ramble there around the question for you.
Yep.
To start with.
And in terms of the threat, I think, Costa, you and I were talking on the phone yesterday about how to navigate those sorts of things. What do you see as the greatest threat from technology just now, and how would you navigate through that?
I don't see a threat. So I love technology. It's a big part of what we do. There's constantly new tools that are being released, and it's happened since the beginning. I mentioned before, you know, growing up on a Greek island, like having a television station that worked consistently was a privilege. So then being able to have access to these technologies, that's something that empowers me and excites me, but I never let it drive, to agree with the panel here in a sense, drive what we do, in a sense, like as in it's not the number one thing. It's something that's sitting in the background. I never discuss it with clients, but it's always part of the conversation internally, and how do these tools enable us to create what we create, and how does it empower it?
Yeah.
So I really don't see it as a threat. I'm incredibly excited by it. I can see that people are threatened by it, even within our own team. I love ChatGPT. I use it every day. I was there on the first day when it was released. I was chatting to it for 4 hours. I love Midjourney. I love all of these tools. I think they're incredibly exciting, and they will assist us, the specialist, become even better at what we do, and they'll assist people that don't have access to this to essentially create a very quick benchmark and a starting point, which just puts us in an anxious position to do better and better and better.
Yep. Now, Daniel, when I spoke to you some years ago, the subject of the future of the VFX and creative industry was still a subject back then. The fact that you're still in business is evidence of the fact that those concerns did not manifest themselves in any near future. Can you offer us any sort of opposing viewpoint to any of those things? What would you say if you were?
Oh, I'd say, I mean, I've got many anecdotes, and unfortunately, I got partway through a PhD in 2001 about this topic, really. But the actual start of that topic was, how did the pencil change architectural design from when they were drawing in a sandbox? And then how did the new tool adjust in various cycles? And you can go way further back than, say, TVs. It's always changed the way people both design and build, and it's interesting when you have this discussion with people, architects and things, of which I've had many, in relation to their fears. And my favourite, most recent fear factor person was one of those really boring sales agents who's about 55, who only knows the last job someone else did that he thinks he could do copy, right? And he told me 5 times in a meeting in front of our client, he can't wait till the AI kills us off and it gets cheap. And so I said, after the 4th time, I said, dude, I think you're in more danger than I am, because the AI is pretty much going to sell everything to everyone pretty shortly, and it's going to be a lot longer for us. And you're all caught up in this idea of the visual, because it's visually impactful. So you're seeing that thing, but what they don't seem to get is that the lawyers and the finances and those people, that's all logical sequences of logic systems. And what we're doing is interpreting sort of human response. Anyway, I can go into a lot of detail about how you can feedback loop on, this is not new. I mean, we're discussing this I was talking at a conference in Venice in 2019, and half the topic was this, of everybody. So it's not like it's, and the only reason why it's become such a present topic right now is because Midjourney appeared, ChatGPT became a public, conversational point in media, and that's it. But some of my other, and I'm going to ramble a little bit because I think it sort of matters. This is those nexus moments that we go through, and having been doing this for 25 years, as in just pure viz, was the first time I remember really being confronted by it. I was at this American Society of Architectural Illustrators conference that was being held in Brisbane. I was talking at it. The only reason why I was talking at it at the age of 25 was because Gollings, who I was working with, who was using this antique thing called a film camera at the time, said I can't be bothered talking to illustrators, so that was a good start. Photographer didn't care. So I got put in his place at the last minute, and I go up there and I sit between 2 professors and wondered why I had been brought up here. It was sort of embarrassing. And I remember sitting at that conference and listening to the panel like this. And it was at that nexus point in 2001 there were 2 hand-drawn illustrators and 2 new Viz people. And back in the days pre-global illumination, it's all sort of omnis and really difficult, sort of bad results. And this guy just sat there for about 10 minutes telling everyone that there is a naturalness to the human eye, the hand and the page, and every toddler and every child will automatically start drawing, and it's a natural part of that. Therefore, hand-drawn illustration will always be important. And I just thought, mate, your ostrich head is in the sand. And it was. And there's still hand-drawn illustrators out there, but it became completely subsumed by the new technology. And I remember thinking it at that moment. And I've always, therefore, kept my mind out for what is that going to change. And one of those things was, say, ray tracing. 2005, 6, everything changed, sped up, V-Ray being a core part of it in my case. And then how we then pushed into the next one. But it's always been another one. VR was meant to be one. That was meant to be another one. Is this another one? Okay, and so I went and did the tests, and I've probably had similar conclusions to what Costa said, but we can flesh that out later. What at the moment, it's like looking at a series of arbitrary inputs that produce whatever someone started the process. So as a machine learns, is it going to get better? Because I can tell you, we just did a film shoot with a model by the Brisbane River, and I was thinking, well, can I use this to storyboard this? Can I use that as a conceptual methodology? And so I wrote down as my input, beautiful blonde woman by the Brisbane River. And what I got back was pretty much low-cut, trashy-looking blonde women by an abstract non-Brisbane River. It was sort of like the Brisbane River. And the reason why I raise that is that in its infancy, the people programming the outcomes and the people doing the inputting are influencing the outcomes. And that is pretty much, and I made a joke to the team, which was, it took ChatGPT to do a trashy photo of a trashy blonde by the river, and it took us a month to do exactly the same thing, because it pretty much felt like that, the result. So the point I'm going to make at the end of the day is it was infancy, and I'd rather let everyone else talk, so I'll stop rambling, but there is a lot of things about targeting inputs and things that are going to change. And lastly, to that thing you said earlier, I started the BIM conference speech with a slide that said, "Why do I still have a job?" And that was in 2017. And at the time I said no one was targeting a cohesive one-touch output response because it was in no one's best interest.
Indeed.
Can I challenge something or not?
Oh, jump in.
Yeah.
I'll segue later.
So this is what I find fascinating about this topic, Daniel, is that you've put the prompt in, and this is what I find interesting. This is what I've seen people's reaction to this technology being. I tried something, it didn't work, and I would argue that it is in the if the prompt is that simple, it's like a brief or telling a story. You need to treat the machine. This sounds really anyway, like it's a person. Like there's a conversation, like there's a narrative, and you need to educate it and give it the purpose and the story and the context. So, woman by lake or whatever it is, it's not going to get you anywhere. And that's what I found with my conversations with ChatGPT and all that. It's almost like my knowledge that I've learned through running a business and working with people has helped my ability to talk with the AI, because you need to make sure you give it a brief, you give it a purpose, you give it context, you give it an understanding of what you're wanting to achieve, and then you essentially go back and forth and almost play, and it gives you something and you go, that's not quite right, and can we try this? And you're really pulling it apart. So I think that's my feedback on that specifically, and to anyone that's tested these tools, because you can try something, it doesn't work, not for me, but if you almost humanize it, and I know that I'm sure there's some sort of psychologist in the room that's going to pull this apart, but if you almost humanize it, then you can get quite interesting results, which then elevate the work and at least give you ideas. It will never, I agree with you, this is where I will agree, it's never going to replace the full photo shoot, but it's going to give you context to make it possibly consider something you haven't thought of before.
Do you think?
Riposte, just 1 second. Take 1 second.
Good.
I'm not saying that's where I stopped, but I'll be very clear.
Yeah. No.
What I'm saying is the point, and obviously it's the nuance of that. No different to, I don't know, I started web designing in a notepad, writing it out manually in 1995. So what I'm sort of saying is that a lot of the WYSIWYG, and you know that it's going somewhere, and that sort of level of nuance is effectively becoming a programming language in relation to what does that code of that word mean? It's like doing a cryptic crossword after a while. What does exclusive mean to it? What does that word mean?
Correct.
And that is a nuance that you learn, that it will learn itself. So the point of my comment was not about whether or not it can't be fashioned. I could just write Chanel next to that, and then suddenly she won't be in a low-cut top, she'll be in whatever. That's not the point. The point is the premise of the baseline. Okay? And the baseline is, and I used to call this in 2008, which was, it was a male-dominated industry of people. And if I wanted the most amazing image that anyone wanted to make, it would be, I used to call it chicks with snakes. It would be a woman having sex with a robot with a snake on her in a spaceship. That is the mentality of a lot of the way things are approaching. And it's still sort of relevant in the way in which, it's not the case anymore, I'll be very clear, that was 15 years ago. Back in the day, and so what you have is that technology focused down on what is style and focus, and then you have to manage it. Now it will learn, and that's the point of it. I'm not saying it isn't, but a lot of this stuff is in its infancy right now, so it is a lot of, I think you said crystal balling earlier, or I think Andre said crystal balling earlier. So it is a thing of flux and change, and at the moment it's fairly arbitrary of throwing things at it and no consistency, and I think that will change, obviously. But but at the moment it's sort of hard to tell.
It is. Yeah, I'm thinking there's a parallel here too, because when you guys were talking about the inputs and the impact of the inputs on the results, you were talking a little bit, Daniel, about, you mentioned the word code. but I was hearing that there's a certain value, there's a certain place for the right expertise, the right background. Now, if as a visual artist, you understand, you could describe to somebody with the right language, even down to the camera lens and the focus and the apertures and all those sorts of things, you can generate imagery with Midjourney and the likes very effectively. I was one of the last years' worth of students studying architecture down at Deakin who was taught to use a drawing board and to draw things with the tech pens and everything else. Now, when it came to me learning to produce documentation, I found that gave me a greater appreciation for the output I was after in terms of managing line weights and some real trivial things like that. But in terms of understanding what it is you're trying to achieve and the background and the ability to articulate that, is there still a place for old style education, maybe older curriculums, in order to give people that better ability to communicate what it is they're after by using the new tools?
Absolutely, I'd say.
The thing I was picking up on the two conversations there, that was the common thread. They were both saying the same thing. It's the knowledge from the person that enables the tool to get the result. Without that knowledge, you wouldn't get the result.
And is that today's manifestation of garbage in, garbage out?
That's the case. In 20 years' time, it may not be, right?
Yeah.
But there's going to be between getting to the point where somebody could turn up that's never understood architecture or visualization and come up with a perfect outcome to now is a long way away, right?
Yep.
And I think that's back to my point at the beginning, right? The bit that we're forgetting in industry is that the experience and the knowledge that has to go into learning the trade of how you become, a top-notch architect or an engineer.
I think
you still got to get the basic knowledge, I guess, is my point there.
Yep.
The assumption is that you're not going to end up with a feedback loop from decision-making coming from one AI to another. Okay, so at which point and this is future telling, the eternal cycle of creating the zeitgeist. Okay, so the way in which, and I sat through another talk about this 5 years ago, where someone had developed this method of sort of sourcing all of the objects around the internet. So they plugged into every single, and I'm sure this is BIM. I haven't looked at it for a while. Standard BIM operation, but they were able to take a room and then sort of update all of the ideal objects based on a visual reference, and they were in the middle of sort of writing this out. So the question is, who's creating the inputs? Okay, so what I say about the zeitgeist is, what is a quality outcome, and who's deciding it, and what decides it? And I'll say this based on the way the internet has changed this stuff, is that around about 10 to 12 years ago, all the brand companies started showing us things they'd found on the internet. Right? Before that, they were generating their own concepts. So they go and do this sort of randomised search, and there was one day where I walked in to a meeting on one side of the road, and there was this image by D-Box, one of the stand ones where she's standing in the window. It was for New York by Geary, and I was briefed by one brand company. I want this picture because this is amazing. I want this, and then I walked over the other side of the road. And a different brand company showed me the same picture and said, I want this. And the projects were opposite each other in Sydney. And I said to the second one, I can't do it for you both, obviously. And the reason why that's relevant is effectively what that was a sort of series of images that were playing out in people's minds, and there was a popularity contest on Pinterest about what was showing up. And then as it comes in, they're coming up on everyone's searches, and then it became inspiring every decision and aesthetic. And when the aesthetic dominates, if Vogue Living starts putting images of, say, renders, of realistic renders on the front page and page photo, and then it feeds off itself, then the computer starts telling us what to do. And when it starts telling us what to do, that comment is no longer relevant because we are informed. We are, as a mass population, not individually, mass population, we are informed by what we see. So it's all pre-programming that will change. Now that's the negative way of looking at the same question, and it will come, and it's already here. So don't, a lot of that talk you hear about people being managed, Josh's favourite story, he's our technical director, is about a person got managed by an AI to get through two-factor authentication. And by the way, two-factor authentication will bring society down. This is my least favourite thing.
Andre,
Andre,
say
yeah.
something.
Yeah,
Because
definitely Andre's turn to
I have
speak now.
stuff to say, but I want you to say.
I can. I mean, look, I'm not necessarily. I
Sorry,
think
Chris.
my deepest held views, but just for the sake of entertainment and a contrarian approach, I could kind of fundamentally put forward a counterpoint to quite a few things said, even though there's many things said. But the premise, we do not know. First of all, this, like a video of this in 5 years could make us look like the biggest bunch of idiots. So I would caution all my fellow my
So say
very
nothing.
handsome.
The safest is to say nothing.
To say anything definitive, you avoid words like always, never, for sure. Okay, avoid. Just that's So looking historically at this thing, see. And I agree. On the one hand, this is just another technology thing, like going from desktop publishing to using Photoshop, going from 2D CAD to Revit. Like there's all these incrementals. Or you could say this is like the Industrial Revolution, which changed a lot more than anything we've experienced, even more than the internet in our lifetime. For example, I'm reading a book now about the sort of 40 years leading up to the Civil War in the United States, where it's really about the revolution of communications and revolution of transport. Now, those things didn't just like make a few things, they like changed things on so many fundamental levels in terms of destroying people's lives, creating people's lives, changing like how people think, how they have access to. So politics, democracy, this book posits, for example, is that freedom and democracy and the whole American thing that we're kind of a reflection of in a country like Australia came because of those two things. Having representative democracy on paper at the time, of course, just meant for like white males who have property, but representative democracy in and of itself didn't create freedom. You needed also communication, people to move around and to be able to trade and do commerce, and communication also enabled knowledge, and so they could actually know what's going on in the world around them. So, like this to me, I don't know. It could be of that magnitude. We don't know like the earthquake really. So just for the fun of I want you just I don't have like but this is a good like. This is potentially much more massive than anything before. Your point, I think you said here, it'll never replace the photo shoot. That I actually think it totally will. And then there'll be new questions. We don't know the questions we will need to ask until that happens, okay? So the whole point of going from creators to curators, which is kind of what people are talking about here, that's like the obvious answer. And that's what we know today in the dial-up year one of the internet, okay? So the idea that this is going to pose such, I think, fundamental questions to how we think about ourselves, even the very nature of creativity. I went to architecture school like everyone else here, and pretty much what was the shoots and the studio subjects? It was like design. We had a Anne Frank Museum in design. Anne Frank Museum, Anne Frank Museum. No, Anne Frank apartment. An apartment for Anne Frank. There was a whole discussion. Whatever. Anne Frank Museum. Blah. Fill in the void. So it was like, okay, take influence from this, combine it with this, sprinkle that, mix it all together, give me 3 ideas, which is literally the way some of these things work. So if that's creativity, that's already kind of being potentially challenged as the unique domain of us genius, human beings. So there's lots of questions that are coming down the pipe over, and it's not 20 years. I think it could be with the pace of things accelerating and the AI looping in on itself, could be a year and a half from now. We're posing questions we have no idea that even exist today. So I think so that is, of course, there's some anxiety to that, but it could be we're living like, I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, as it happens, and I love his approach to all these things about how like we could be living on the cusp of a whole new way of everything, and I think us or anybody who is thinking about their career and what they do and their creative expression and their even self-identity, I try to always take up like a positive, let's ride the dragon kind of approach to these things. I don't know which way the dragon's turning. I don't know what it's going to feel like when I touch, when I'm sitting on its back and trying to like, hang on. But exactly like, let's say that Industrial Revolution or communicate, like there were people that that created whole new realities from it, right? Imagine Thomas Edison just getting, you know how long it took him to get like electricity going? There was like 5 different electricity like algorithms, and I'm not that I like, no, not algorithms. You know, there was like, it was like a whole thing that was completely unknown where it's going to go, and then we're here. And the pace of this acceleration is much faster than things were happening then. So to me, I just think it's not just another. I really think it's not just another thing. It's not just another 2D to 3D desktop to.
It does seem, if I can interject there briefly, going back to when Chris first opened, and he was talking somewhat skeptically, I suppose, about the potential magnitude of this. If we talk about the current impact of technology, and obviously technology changes so rapidly that current is a very specific parameter here. But if we take AI specifically, not just say software or SaaS and so forth in the cloud, I think the conclusion we're arriving at is that we all recognise that the impact yet to be had on our industry from AI specifically is a bit of a case of anyone's guess, because it's still so early. That said, it's also got the potential, because we've had decades of experience in industry, that it could be underwhelming, as we've found, and I would tend to agree, the change from, say, CAD to BIM in the delivery of design and documentation. It hasn't really or radically changed industry. It's got a lot of fanfare, and it's improved efficiency, productivity perhaps by certain measures, not others. But I suppose time will tell is a bit of an end conclusion of this. And what I wanted to do then was just pivot from that position of knowing, okay, none of us know exactly what the future is going to hold, but how are things changing in the here and the now? So can I ask each of you just to respond in turn? How are you employing, if you are, how are you employing AI in your own firms, and for what purpose? And what's your take on it? Like, what have you learned? What are your key takeaways? Where do you think it's most valuable for you? And perhaps, where did you think it was going to be of a benefit, and you found so far it's just coming out with nothing? Is there something you can share from each of your perspectives?
I use it every day. I'm on ChatGPT every day. I've been using Midjourney from the start.
I think just move your mic a little closer to you, back to your mouth.
Sorry. Hello?
Better. Yep.
Hello. Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah, it's still better.
Okay. And I use it for, I'm not a strong writer. So ChatGPT is fantastic in terms of using it like a consultant. I think I said this before. So I explain the topic, I educate it, and I essentially use it like a consultant. And even within our industry, it's interesting when you speak to mentors or consultants, you have to educate them on our field. It's very niche, it's very specific. There's a specific way of looking at it. I don't necessarily need to do that with ChatGPT. It understands straight away. But what it doesn't understand is our nuance, our studio, our vision, and all those sorts of things. So anything that's writing based, I use it as almost like a sparring partner and go back and forth and have a look at it. I use it personally for that. So I find it very, very powerful for those sorts of things. When I'm looking at anything writing related along the business, I find it really powerful. AI, like Photoshop released a new AI update the other day where you can circle something, type something in. 80% of the results are funny, 20% actually work. So that's a lot of fun to use. Midjourney, going back to what we were saying before, like, you know, the team have used it. Veronica, my business partner, Veronica Saunders, comes back and goes, oh my God, these images look awful. They look rendery, they look fake. And I said, it's all in the prompting, and put something together and it looks like something that we would visually really like. So again, I agree with you, Andre. I think this is massive. And I don't think it's not, as in AI may not replace photography. I don't think I said that. I do think this is massive, but I see it exciting, and maybe that's just my perspective, and obviously it is, but as in the way that I view these sorts of things and look at risk. Is this risky? Is this massive? Yeah. Will it challenge us? Absolutely. Will it challenge what the purpose of the photograph was in the first place if AI replaces it? Like, as in, it's challenging things, and it's challenging our approach. Will people potentially maybe lose their jobs along the way? Will our industry possibly transform? Yes. Why not? Awesome. That's part of the excitement. Will the job that I do today or that my team do today be exactly the same in 5 years? I hope not, regardless of AI. And that's just the way I view things. Like, even if this whole thing wasn't here, I don't want to be doing the same thing. So that's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is anybody actually mucking around also using AI? I mean, we talked about AI being used for text generation and analysis and so forth, and also like Midjourney for coming up with imagery. I know that videos, the production of videos with AI is a little bit early days, and so we'll probably see a parallel between the image generation and video generation. But just pivoting again to VR and XR and so forth, the immersive experience, has anybody had any experience with or done any research on I guess something like a projection into a person's mind? Because at the moment we're limited to what people can see and hear and touch and smell. And I'm just spitballing here, but has anybody heard of any experimentation with the projection of experiences into the mind? And noting that could probably get very Orwellian or very Black Mirror-ish very quickly. But it could be also used for good. I mean, if you're wanting to communicate, to engage, to excite, to inform, to have an emotive experience.
To convert, to control, to, oh no, there's a lot of
Quite potentially, yes. Yeah.
I don't know. No.
Good.
I've read a lot of science fiction. I've read a lot of science fiction.
Yeah.
So, but, and I think the sensory inputs that you're talking about are the things that go into your mind, but it depends on what you mean, like electromagnetic nodes or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I mean, back in 2010, I tried a brain-computer interface for the first time, and there was a key distinction between a brain-controlled interface and a brain-controlled device, because one is controlling the other. It's not necessarily two-way by default.
This I know nothing about. Maybe you should talk about it.
No. That's as much as I know. I'm curious about you guys. Just imagining where this could take us, and trying to link back in the XR type subject as well.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I guess I come from a different angle. I didn't go to architectural school. I went to the engineering school, so I'm the odd one out here, I guess. But so from a contractor's point of view and engineering point of view, we're very much focused around reality and the quality of things. And I guess that this is, to my point of where technology for me hasn't changed the industry to date is because it hasn't improved the quality of what we produce. It's actually taking it backwards. And the quality of what we get is actually worse than it was when I started, in my mind. It may be done quicker, but the quality of what we get to is less. Not in all areas. I think it depends on which industry and which region of the world you're in. But from a builder's point of view, it's very much around the quality of what data we have at any particular point in time. So it's more, what we're looking at is more the predictive element of where AI could assist in that prediction part. So looking at program, looking at cost, how do you actually have a better sense of where you are going to be rather than where you actually are, right? So, dashboards, you talk about AI, like dashboards were the flavour of the month 2 or 3 years ago, like Power BI, it was, everybody wanted a dashboard and everything, right? And the thing I've challenged in my business is dashboards are great, but have you actually validated what's going into them? Do you really know that all of the data that you're visualizing on these dashboards is actually true and correct? Or is it just a nice coloured chart that says everything's hunky-dory, and the reality is when you get to site, the reality is very different than what the dashboard says. So that's our focus at the moment. It's looking at things like programs, so not necessarily internal development, but startups that are playing in that space of looking at how you can come up with optioneering of program to look at different analyses of how we could build something differently in a shorter time frame. So not replacing the traditional role of a planner right now, but working alongside them to look at different scenarios. I've got a guy in my team at the moment who I brought in at the start of the year just because of his ability to code, right? So coding in construction is not something that happens very often, right? So that's about to me, that's even going back 4 or 5 years in terms of just that concept of that skill set being important leading towards what you can do with machine learning, right? So he's been playing around with machine learning, just looking at the quality of data that we're getting from BIM models from our design partners that isn't at the level we need it to be able to do quantification, estimation, cost planning in an efficient way. Right? So we're not getting quality data, but what he's able to do with machine learning is actually learn trends based off bad data. So we actually have a better understanding of where that model is or what that model is telling us rather than the factual
And presumably
perspective, we should
that
have.
runs a little bit of a parallel back to the earlier subjects of the skill of crafting an effective prompt for ChatGPT. Is that what you're saying is you're using the experiences of today to form a better question for the next project? Insofar as managing, okay, we know where the flaws are likely to be with the data. Now we can either better define a requirement, we can better define the question that helps us to get a better answer.
But, okay, do you mind if I answered the question 2 questions ago?
Sure. Yes.
And a comment on what was said here and what you just said. So first of all, I think the whole idea of prompt engineering is going to be like, I strongly believe, will be like the ringtones, which is like super important for 6 months, and then completely like laughable
Correct.
thing that
Yeah,
it will
100%.
all
Yeah.
go into actual, what is it called? Human, like you just
That's
tell
right.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it does. The current prompt engineering
Yeah.
is like a complete
It's a
little
fad.
tiny.
Yeah.
It's like a little startup phase of the technology, which will become absolutely.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the question earlier, what are we doing in terms of actually using these things, and kind of relates to what you brought up here in terms of engineering and the quality actually diminishing with what AI is able to do today. Now, if you think about the world of engineering or self-driving cars, the level of risk for getting it wrong in those spaces is extremely high. Self-driving car, 98% correct equals death, right? Building 89% 98% well engineered equals calamity, right? However, take that into architectural visualization, making images of a luxury real estate with a coffee cup placed before a vague view of the New York City skyline. And then what if that skyline is not quite right? A person who lives in that area knows some of those buildings aren't actually the buildings that you see from that location. Risk currently, that's inaccurate view. Now, all these questions are within the paradigm of how companies like us, the three of us, because we pretty much do the same thing, deliver value to our clients. If our clients say, you know what, I can disclaimer and kind of explain to my audience that it's kind of the New York skyline, but then I'll save a lot of money and speed. I'll get to market, make more money, and make them that's not a. I could totally see some developers going, I'm just going to go, instead of commissioning a $50,000 photo shoot of skyline of city X, I'll just AI that and disclaimer it, and it'll look good enough conceptually. So there you go. So for example, direct two-day application, all three of us could be using, right? And the kind of nightmares we go through, the drone photography permissions are not allowed because you need the army to fly with the drone, and the weather and the bullshit, and this is complete, sort of, what are they called? They're these are not value-adding activities. No. They're overcoming technological
constraints.
Constraints, exactly. Constraints. So the way currently, where you use the current stuff that's available today is very much dependent on this kind of where is the lowest hanging fruit value-wise, the least risk to use it if you get it wrong, because it is hallucinating. This stuff, it's making it up. It's just a sophisticated thing on the phone when it completes your sentence. What's it called?
Predictive text.
Predictive text. It's predictive text on steroids. That's on steroids. That's on many other steroids. So
there's a quote for the day.
so that's what it is. It can get it wrong. So every story, it wrote better legal advice than that lawyer. Then the other time, there's 5 stories where the lawyer was fired for using ChatGPT to write legal advice. So we're kind of navigating it partly in that way. Where can we use this in an effective, value-adding way? Obviously, that hopefully either takes away some boring part of our process, or saves us a bit of time, or makes it or allows for quicker iteration. That is low risk. So one of the obvious things early on, and I'm sure you guys and others use it this way, is as you said before. Concept development, idea generation. So instead of going, we're going to go, I don't know, it could be anything. We're doing a look dev for a project in Costa Rica, and we're thinking, different types of tonality to the image set in terms of even just like time of day. So instead of looking in images on the internet, you could quickly iterate like 10 ideas, sometimes even in the meeting with a client, you know, and show them. So it's low risk because we're not promising anything. It's basically a mood board on steroids. Before, it take one of our art directors, you know, half a day to mood board it, and it takes them 10 minutes. That's a kind of like, and we get more. So we get more ideas for the client. The art director, of course, has to use their sense of curation, make sure they're not proposing shit, excuse me. And it's like, you know, there's like a win-win-win-win. Everybody potentially has a very babyish version, of course, of what this could become, but that's one. So another area we have used it specifically was facial replacement for people and assets. So entourage, ironically, not the whole thing, because, you know, there's a lot in what we do, and I'm probably quite a few archivist people here, like precision is important, right? It has to be right. That material on the floor has to be right. You know how many clients go nuts at us for, that's not quite the timber, you know, oak timber that we spec, and you don't understand that, blah, blah, blah. So it has to be, but certain other things don't have to be precise. They just have to look a certain way. So you can imagine people not looking 3D, some accessories, an art piece on the wall. You know, there's these little things that actually in the workflow take a lot of time, but these are the obvious, like, low-hanging fruit that to use. The other factor that the way we look at it, we're very conscious of this because we try to be a responsible corporate entity, is the legality of it. There are platforms. The technology is legal, the data set's not necessarily, and there's lots of things before the courts currently around that. So, you know, plagiarism is a big issue. Using stuff that and you know, Getty Images are not that happy that every one of their images for free is inside Midjourney, you know, and then so that's a whole, obviously that's before the court, blah, 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 but I always try to err on the side of like, let's do no harm and not screw ourselves, and then, you know, so we look at it, so things that, like, you know, Photoshop, like Firefly, that they're integrating, like, you know, and that is something that is compatible with current tools, achieves some low-hanging fruit outcomes for us, interesting and exciting for the team to use, and like go from there, go next, go next, go next. That's our optimistic, slightly cautious, but like let's have fun approach. On the R&D side, we have an amazing one of our sort of junior artists, actually, with a great story. She's unbelievable. I think she'll be like creative director of the future one day. This has been recorded, right? Shit, oops, edit that. I mean, I'm happy to hear it, but I just...
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Pay rise.
Huh?
Pay rise.
Yeah. She like did a paper, basically, unprompted, no pun intended, like a research paper that like just blew, it did all the rounds of like executive creative director, myself, like everybody, like, oh my, this is insane. And it was this kind of stuff, a lot more along those lines, that is, you know, incredibly, I think, as a first baby step, but it's super exciting, and there you can kind of play more and push the boundaries more. We're actually doing for clients. We want to be like exciting, practical, deliver value, and not screw things up too much in areas that are liable to do harm to something.
Well, I find it interesting you start with views, because I've been told by my professional indemnity insurance that's the only reason why I have to have it. So
sorry?
The only reason why I've got professional indemnity insurance is because of view accuracy, right? So just
Yes.
I mean that's the exposure.
Yeah, you're right.
So from the point of view of that as being a low hanging fruit.
To be clear, Binyan has not done that, but yes,
yeah,
he's right.
Exactly. So
don't use that. Don't pitch against me on that.
And you'll find that the only and by the way, legalities-wise, you know, accuracy on that is different from one state to another, even in Australia. So it's an interesting thought process. It can be looser here than Sydney. Sydney's got New South Wales is a lot more stringent on most of this stuff. But what I actually do like, with the low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's pretty risk-averse outcomes. Josh likes to tell me we never update anything until Service Pack 1 shows up, right? And that's pretty much what I'm saying. Or maybe Service Pack 6. In this case, but what I'm getting at is, this is a massive time sink. You've been sitting on it how long? You've been sitting on it how long? You've been sitting on it how long? I'm very happy for other people to sit on it for a very long time until it gets past the prompt thing, to some extent. Okay. So what it is just shooting out concepts. It's speculative, randomised outcomes, and therefore even at the top end of creative input at the moment. So I've run the whole. So I mean and the only part we're talking about, the vast majority of visualisers are taking specific inputs, creating specific outcomes based on palettes. Most of the visualization companies pretty much follow a very similar palette through most of their work anyway, and that's based on the tool systems they're using mostly. And whatever, it's not a dissing thing, I'm just sort of talking about who actually does that creative part in what we do. And it's few and far between. We do it a lot, obviously, because when you make films and when you're working within brand structures and working that out, I'm not going to talk for others, it is an important part of it. Yes, I can see that as a very potential benefit, and probably sooner rather than later. But having done the sets of tests, and the reason why I raised the Trashy Girl by the Brisbane River is targeting sequential outcomes that actually are beyond one concept image is a time sink compared to running a random search of Costa Rica. I could find 20 of those things in 2 seconds and then put it out, and in actual fact, the client is the decision maker, so it's actually how I present it verbally or conceptually that is more important than one photo. So there are a lot of things in relation to how that is, and that's where we come back to the feedback loop. It is not going to take over until it knows how to interpret client comments. And therefore the client, once that happens, the client is doing the prompting.
Correct.
But that's one of the biggest ones. I would love for it to move the vase. If it could move the vase for me, I would like.
Well, you probably can, and that's specific content. Take that image, move vase left.
Yeah.
Relative, and to be honest, that should be easy.
Yeah.
Out of everything,
That's going to come.
And so that's specific prompting related on outcomes, and it's just a process in time, right? So that's 100%. But no, it's more about what is there right now and then what it can be. And I don't think being negative about it. I mean, progress should achieve certain things. What did that entire conversation about railways and telegraph and whatever else do to change people's lives? It improved. It did a lot of things about movement, but it also did things like technology improvements, people's impact of communication, improved other lines of communication, and then impacted and snowballed into what we have. And why does that matter in relation to what we're saying now is that their improvement was health related, not so much their jobs or where they were. They all live longer now. The vast improvement, and their labour changed. They went from working six days a week, 10 hours a day, and it shrank. So all you read at the moment is a whole bunch of journalists out there wanting to reduce all of us to 4 days a week so they don't have to work as much. Okay, and I would say that very clearly. Meanwhile, if we reinvent the plumber, then the plumber doesn't have to attend site. But I do think that you're going to. There's an article last week about the change of new class structures of hands-on people versus conceptual people. Where I'm trying to go is transition of time is about how it impacts our lives. Otherwise, why do it? Okay. So if we can revert ourselves to 2 days a week, the rest of the time spent in a hammock and going around, and that is that progress. Are we all going to feel happy doing that? Why are we doing this? And I went on a 2-week holiday last week, but I actually got really bored. And then people started emailing me, and then I got into it again. What I'm trying to say is, everyone says to me, I'm going to retire at 48. Someone told me that I'm 48 now, so it's a bit depressing. But this is part of our lives. So you've got to ask the question, what are we trying to benefit from this process? And it's not being a Luddite by saying this, it is saying, where do we want to go? And no one's thinking that way except for Elon and all the other people bang. Is that whole anti-AI thing about the world dying, or is it actually about them too? It's actually about their businesses, isn't it? So I think at the end of the day, it's hard to really pick how people move it. It takes, at the moment, capital to drive an outcome, and they all running for an outcome that sort of will be capitalised massively. And the reason why I said, why do I still have a job from BIM, is because no one's going to be able to capitalise on that overlap anytime soon. So no one, it's like talking to Autodesk. Why have you spent 12 years slightly improving things for technical, but making it easier for people to enter into your software? Because you want more people to use it and buy it. You're not improving it for the users, you're improving it for ease of entry. And that is sort of how capitalism works. But when you have a whole bunch of randomised structures all sort of working together to sort of then come out with an ideal outcome, you need structure to actually create that focal point, and it's not coming in most of what we're doing because there's no immediate vision of how it's going to improve anyone's life. As I said before, the vision images, pretty pictures, have immediate impact, and people can see how AI is affecting it far before, and ChatGPT is very clearly able to do that as well. I played with that First thing I wrote into it was, what's the most well-regarded architectural visualization company in the world? And it wrote
Oh
that.
yeah, what did it say?
I'm pleased to say that...
This will be
That
interesting.
it wasn't Binyar.
Yeah.
and I wrote a...
Oh, you're smiling so much,
slightly
Daniel.
out.
I think I know the answer.
I'm very specifically writing dumb questions because all that sort of nuanced downput is exactly the reason that we said earlier, that Andre said, which was, having done Notepad entry HTML programming before, I know what a waste of time of my brain it was. It's completely useless now. So a lot of that sort of thought. But I do know the basis of how tags work in HTML. That's pretty helpful. No, but what I'm getting at is that the way in what was I saying?
What did it say? What was the answer?
Oh,
It's a cliffhanger.
punchline. What it said.
Oh man.
No, it was. It did. It actually wrote out a list, and then it wrote, and the top 5 well-renowned, and it did write a list out of. And by the way, this is like, and as I said, no nuance. I then did it.
It would have said
more
mirror,
intelligent.
I imagine.
Number 1 was D-Box. Number 2 was Mir. Number 3 was Boundary, which I found sort of bizarre. And number 4 was us. And I cannot remember what number 5 is. Unfortunately, it wasn't Binyan. But then again, does it know my name and does it know it's talking to me? Maybe it's trying to please me. I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the point I'm going to sort of write that down, that made me happy for a moment. I thought, this thing is built to make me happy. I don't know. But
Got to rethink everything.
I screen grabbed it. I've got it somewhere. But I was just saying, well, that's all right. In the world of your career, you've built something from scratch.
Let's see with
Number 4.
ChatGPT 4 because it has a bigger
No,
knowledge
this is
base.
definitely 5. And
So
I was even. Oh, no, it's definitely 5. It may have
I'll
been.
just- I'll just
It may
get
have
my
been
phone.
Gabriel Saunders. Actually, I'm trying to.
I'm kidding.
No, but it was. Look, it's a fun. And why does it think that? What data set does it access? I mean, I'm not claiming we're number 4 in the world. I'm just simply saying, well, that either proves it's incredibly accurate or it's not. And that's the point.
I think something about time which came up before, it's interesting, Andre, and I know this is just conversational, but creative director, someone works on something, you get something in 10 minutes as opposed to 5 hours. My counter to that is spend the 5 hours. You've just got into the 5 hours in 10 minutes and now use the 4 hours, whatever the math is, that are left to push that, because that 10 minutes, it's momentary. It's exciting at the start, and then you'll see everyone will have 10-minute results. Right. And that's happening so rapidly that in 3 months, it goes back to the D-Box image and all that. And it goes back to architecture as well. Like architecture has been talking about this prior to AI through photography. So essentially clients going, I want this building that I saw in New York in Melbourne. And we've seen it, and we walk around and we see buildings and we're like, that looks like that one that I saw. And that's because we're responding to clients, which is a whole other
This
conversation.
building responded to the judge.
Well, yeah.
Daniel
so there's a whole thing there. So about this referencing imagery and using that as a base, like there's a whole conversation around that. But I would say, that's momentary. It's fun, it's exciting, and then you go, my gosh, I just saved all this time. And I don't think it's going to lead to us being in hammocks or whatever. I think we'd probably, I will work, and I don't think about retirement, and I love this stuff. But will it transformational, but essentially just will elevate niche, push us all collectively.
Yeah, well, that's why I said, for example, I mean, you're right, absolutely. If it's 10 minutes of crap, right?
Well, it might not be crap. It might be equivalent to the 5
as
hours,
people
but
do,
then you
do they know how to
push it further.
It's a question of, do people know how to think versus how much of that 5 hours they're using to do menial, elements of the task. And the two, there's an overlap. But no, you're right. The question is, in a practical sense, when those, for example, if you believe that iteration leads to better outcomes, then iterating quicker, which is arguably, again, these are all things you could argue with, would say if you can try 20 ideas within an hour and a half, whereas that would have only allowed you to try a couple of ideas, and then run with it, is that an improvement in quality and also a time saver? I mean, it also depends on the individual, depends on the framework, but these are the variables, right?
It reminds me of I think it was Abraham Lincoln who had the quote: "If I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 7 sharpening the axe."
Yeah.
And refining the thing that he needs to do its job effectively. He's not going to chop faster. He's going to cut faster. He's not swinging the axe faster.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're wrapping up shortly, so I just want to bring this part of this morning to a close and then open up to the floor for some questions, if anybody has them for the speakers, for the panel. But one thing just to touch on very quickly is we've talked a bit about how technology as a concept and the way it's hyped can sometimes not deliver on the results that we're promised or that we are that are alluded to, in the sense there's, particularly when it comes to time and productivity, because as you say, if you can reduce a task from 5 hours down to 10 minutes, that becomes the new norm, and you haven't really saved anything. Everybody changes at once, so your competitive advantage that you've just achieved is gone, it's wiped out. Pivoting just a little bit, are there any aspects of the technology we've discussed today that you would recommend to the people in this room to avoid on the basis that it's nothing but hype, it's not worth it, and to focus on something else instead? Clearly nothing to do with Chaos or Storm FX, because they're Digistor. That's not where I'm going. I'm just saying, with what you've achieved thus far and with your experiences thus far, what would you say is just best left alone? Because obviously not every new technology coming at us is going to stick. Not every new technology is going to give us something tangibly, measurably important and lasting.
But I actually think it's too early for that too, to be honest. And that discussion about what you're thinking about and whether you're playing with things or not, I don't think so. Usually it's the time sink question and when you're doing it. So as in, am I sitting there for 7 hours trying to find the perfect version of that to explain to someone that? Or can I just go and find that way or that way or that way? So I would say, yes, I'd be avoiding right now certain precedent sets for creative outputs. But that's most of them really. I'd say that right now, but that means not watching them. But plenty of people in my office would say that, maybe I am technologically averse. The reason for it is not, and it is always not, I've never been technologically averse. There's two things I'll say about this one. Back in about 1999, when I was studying design and architecture in 5th year, everything was process-driven design. Okay, so that meant the way most students had begun to work was all about process architecture, which is effectively procedural inputs to create a series. That was before Grasshopper appeared. It was before a couple other things appeared. So, and that was basically just inputting things into array systems through Max, and then they create an amazing-looking form. Well, that's an amazing-looking form. Now, you would imagine that would have changed design completely, which is input some numbers, it arrays out a shape, and then I can just shell it out, and then I send it over to BIM thing, that just shells the whole thing out, and then it's got whole system structures, and that all just extrapolates it out, and you should have a building designed, and then you can put in the topography, and therefore it should be approximate enough, and you can do all that. That should have happened 15 years ago. Why hasn't it? Because in actual fact, that it's the critical decision-making of what you're looking at at the moment, and I'll keep on saying at the moment, is driven by someone, and my favourite, I actually said this to someone yesterday in my office, favourite word of 2021, which is pivot, which we just used.
Sorry.
Is the ability to pivot. Okay, so the ability to pivot and to look at things and use whatever lifetime's experience, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, whatever you've got, to something out there in your experience is going to make you go and have a click moment and you pivot that way. And is that going to come from this process? Because that feedback cycle we're talking about will just feed on itself. Another way of looking at this is that, in the 90s, the flares came back, probably for about 4 or 5 years. I don't remember the flares coming back again. Okay, fashion cycles.
You're talking about the pants, not the rocket.
The pants, yeah, pants. Okay, so we're all pretty cool at Dangerfield in 1995. There was the flares came back, but not full bell bottoms. It was somewhere in the middle. It's close. And have they come back again? Sort of. Have you noticed that fashion cycles have shortened? Okay, and pretty much homogenised. People take a photo in 2012 compared to now. How much difference is there, except for who's walking down a runway? And a lot of that is about zeitgeist, visual appearance. That's why I won't get a tattoo. Okay, it is that cycle of information and visual communication. The other thing we don't necessarily talk about is access to knowledge creates different expectations in the client group. So Instagram has changed the average punter we deal with to understand what a filter is, i.e. random word for the word grading, and how it is that and their language has changed to now actually knowing the difference between hashtag no filter or with filter. And so from the point of view that there's the average person is more intelligent about vision than what they were 15 years ago because they're looking at more things. And all this is interrelated, a lot like talking about any other technological changes over the last 200, 400 years, 500, 600 years. All this stuff is interrelated, and the question is whether this thing that is going to learn out of it all and then create the ability to have a pivot moment, and that's what we're all doing when we build the AI. We're having a pivot moment as a group. So I look at it, and I'd like to, and this actually gets back to a humanist concept, which is that machine up here something that is more than the machine? And if it isn't, then it probably can pivot. I'm going to say, if this is more than a machine, it probably can't. And I think from that point of view, that's what we're waiting for. And when it can, we probably can be in hammocks, and maybe we'll be happy, live in virtual environments and be controlled by our computer brain inputs and whatever it is. And I think I always sound negative, but I've always said this. I always sound like I'm a negative, but I'm actually optimistic, and I just get disappointed a lot when it doesn't work out. But it's the point I'm making is I actually think all this stuff is great. I mean, life is boring if it just stays the same, and let's just try and make of what we can and find new things. I mean, it's not that, but just remember that pivot thought process is what the difference between a head artist, lead artist who knows their tools to a junior artist who is being controlled by their tools. And that goes back to that design concept. In the 1999, that fifth year architecture student that was putting in array around that in Shop was being controlled by the tool. And how do we keep in control of the tool? And I think that's across all parts of this AI discussion, across all industries. And that's, but I still think it's an optimistic thing. Okay, so.
Indeed. Just with 2 minutes left, do you guys want to have any closing comments? Do you have anything?
On your question? Is that a question for all of us? Or
No,
just
it's
anything general?
very general and broad, just with 2 minutes left. Anything else you would like to impart to the room?
Well, there'll be questions from the audience.
There will be questions from the audience.
Maybe I'll impart at that stage. I'm good with imparting.
I think it's just education. I think I do, this is where I agree, like constructive critical thinking, it's education, it's another data point, experiment, test, look, but don't look for answers, if that makes sense. So it's just you have to think constructively, you have to think critically, especially when you're creative. I would say especially actually in any job you are at the moment, if you're not doing that, that's where the threat is. And that's the separation essentially. If you're going back to the inputs, even sometimes when we work with clients or even teams and they say, can you just tell me what to do at every point? I'm like, that's gone. That your job, if that's your view now, your job will not exist. Yeah. So you need to be able to deal with the abstract, with the uncertainty, especially in a creative industry, things going round in a loop. You're heading in this direction and suddenly you're back to where you started, and you need to be okay with that because sometimes that's where the answer is or somewhere in between. So you just have to it's just another education point. It's like reading a book, it's like watching a film. It's just something that you need to be aware of, not be scared of, and I don't think there's anything in any experience in the world as good or bad. I mean, I'm viewing that from my own very perspective. I haven't been in a war or anything like that. Yep. Of course, I understand this in a wider context, but it's all just another data point and a bit of education. That's what I would say. And
Chris, any last comments?
I think for me, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. I mean, I've sat here nodding. I agree with like from a personal company perspective or an individual perspective, it can only get better. It's like I'm a technologist. I'm trying to driven myself and my teams to do new things better every time we come to work. I think that's really important to keep that enthusiasm and drive going. I think the challenge for me, and to go back to the broader term, not just AI, technology in the AEC industry, it's about the landscape in which we collaborate and work as an industry that is the limiting factor to technology really delivering on its promise. So and that's fundamentally requires a change in the way that government, procure work. It's not technology driven. That's actually the limiting factor for me. It's more the contractual element, the delivery mechanisms that allow us to really as an industry, collectively get the benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
The only, sorry, one, if, okay, now I thought of something. I think the only way for a business, sorry, the only way for an individual or business to like have the best chance of not being like somehow, as Scott was saying, replaced, is to position yourself within what you do in the layer that thinks is strategic, is actually kind of what you were saying, basically. I'm magnifying that or whatever, my own version of that. That's the only way you can, like if you're an operator of a tool now, on the one hand, you actually have to be really good at operating tools, so I'm not saying that's what we're here for, like, but your core value within the value chain, which is job-wise what this thing is called, needs to be high up. I think companies like, sorry, I don't know too much, but like our three respective organizations, we're very fortunate to all work in the upper layer, I would say, of like high-end, bespoke, intelligence-driven stuff. There's 100 companies that kind of do what we do that, like, I think have a lot to be concerned about, but because we typically are engaged in different ways by our clients for our different respective strengths, et cetera, but to kind of come up with something magical and like, there's a certain je ne sais quoi, that is like why you work with either of us three, that I think we're not sitting here freaking out. And that applies on an individual career level, exactly the same idea, just bring it into your world. That's the only way you don't know what's coming down the pipe, but that's the best way you can position yourself to take advantage and avoid, issues going forward.
So you're saying we're okay, but the modelers are doomed.
Sorry?
In our own companies. What I'm trying to say is you're focusing on the top end sort of strategic element of what we're doing.
Well,
and we're talking about, so what I'm saying is, who are we talking to right now? Okay? Who are we talking to? Are we just talking to the leaders of the companies are going to be fine, and what you're doing? And so the question actually is, what I'm saying to that is, what are individuals who have a particular role in your company going to do to get into that strategic position? Are they going to become our competition? Is that how they're going to do it? It's not that I'm...
I think within each layer there is strategic and more doing level.
That's just a qualification. I wasn't trying to diss. Just saying it's
we need to wrap up this portion, but I think I can see where you're both right, in the sense that even if you are more of a technical operator type role, maybe a junior just getting started, if you're still able to think separately to and above the technology, such that you are the master and it is the slave, not the other way around, that will bode well for you in your career. Yeah. Do we have any questions from the floor before we finish up? And if you would like to pose a question, just make sure you're speaking loudly, and by all means introduce yourself. You got a microphone there? Yep, great, fantastic. Yes, we've got one up the front here. Yep. Fantastic.
Not more of a question, but a bit of advice. So we did have something similar in our office just a few weeks ago. So one of our principals just coming around, it just reminded me when people say, I want BIM. And all of a sudden he goes saying, sorry, I'm coming from an architectural firm.
Which firm?
An architectural firm, so Bill at least.
Mm-hmm.
So he was saying, I wake up every morning looking through all this spread, feel like we're behind with this AI thing. Can you start looking at this AI and set up a task force? And then I'll start showing all these things, like mid-journeys and all the likes. And then he goes, this is just noise. But then can you filter all this noise? So my question is, what is the maturity of this AI at the moment? Is it the time to set up a task force within a company, do some more research, or is still going to be a time sink?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the time, and by the way, architecture firms, and I know Sydney has this process of, quality of architecture component to your planning controls and all that stuff. So they have little competitions for architects in it. And because they get 2 weeks and minimal money to or whatever it is they get to do the competitions in, I've been told by at least 4 of those that they're all actually already dumping in their own architecture firm name combined with this look and feel and that location, and then they are getting a instant design response and putting it into competition entries because it happens that fast. Or I want a Zaha building on that. It's happening more to architects than it is to us in many ways. And then how do you control that exact aesthetic? It's through a mid-journey, so it's noise. It is noise. But and I spoke to another friend who's at a gold medal winning architecture firm yesterday, and I asked, what are they up to? And they have a task force, and that's what they're focused on. Specifically, what should have been seen as the key creative moment of why you wanted to be an architect in the first place. That is what they've decided they're going to target, and what everyone went to university to study, which is, yes, and I don't think being specific, by the way, of say, I'm doing Anne Frank House mixed with that, and effectively combining concepts together. Mind you, it happens to us all the time. 3 storyboards. Can I have 1 and 3, thanks? And it happens all the time. But what I'm getting at is that focal point on the creative moment should be the thing that rewards most people who choose to be architects, possibly more so than the visualisers. But they all feel, like you just said, it's a gut reaction. Is my ostrich head in the sand? And what do I need to look at? And I would say right now, well, if they can generate 20 building ideas in 20 seconds, then you are being a bit dumb not thinking about it that way. But if you have to enter a plan, what are you going to do that with at the moment? Nothing. Okay. But that being said, I managed to finish the entire final degree without drawing a single plan at university. So it must be possible in terms of creating forms. And that's what I mean when I say that. It is sculpture making in virtual life that then has to be applied into reality. And that is the thing that is not appearing in any of this at the moment, which is why it's noise if you are looking at real things. Okay, real things have a lot of other inputs that are, and I actually did like the point that Andre said about the 98% accuracy thing. It is 100% right. So hence, much more risk for that, but you can do pretty pictures at the front to win a design competition and then change it, I guess. But do you change it? Because that's in your audience's mind. And you're then led by your own style, because you've entered your own name in. How many different Zaha buildings are there? Just as a question. I mean, they look pretty, but there's a reason why I can look at every building. Oh, that's a Zaha building. When do they get their second idea?
Yeah.
Right. And it's a joke, though. The old adage that you're not an author until you've written your second book. It's actually true. Okay, so anyway, that's food for thought.
What's the key takeaway then? Should you jump in or should you not?
Oh, I think you jump in for sure. Be aware. Don't be stupid. Be aware. And even just doing this panel discussion, I mean, it's not that I wasn't aware. Like, I knew what it was about, and I've discussed it with people. I've put the things in. I've decided to put more effort in over the last few weeks just to sort of make sure I'm more don't look like an idiot, first of all. But it's not why I'm technologically aware, but just having the awareness actually made me happier about it. Actually knowing it's noise, really.
I would venture to say,
So that was right.
that aside from the task force question, if anybody here is just contemplating, how should I dive into this? Where might it lead me? Even if you were not afforded the time to do that on professional time, but only want to do it, in the waking hours of the night, whatever. Much like with some of the other technologies we have seen, if you are the first to move in your company, it's likely to give you a benefit back in terms of your career progression. And if it doesn't, but it has intrinsic value, then maybe look outside and see who else is valuing those things that you've come to learn. Any other questions?
One of our main competitors, I shouldn't put it that way, one of our similar type people based in Sydney put a post on LinkedIn saying, all the stills makers are doomed, the film people are probably safe, which I thought was just, to be honest, completely and utterly wrong. It's just that there's, as per what we said, there's already people who have got ChatGPT to write a script that then gets fed into that one, and there's a film that looks professional until you realise it all looks plastic and has no soul. And I think it's an interesting process of, anyway, it's all about the time, the sense of time right now. It's going to change.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, pass it over. That's convenient. Well done.
Is this on?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. I'm Mick, also with Sanglia BLP, and I think it's really important what you guys said about not being controlled by our tools. Do you think it's possible to make a tool that doesn't seek to control? Because I've worked with some people in the past that sometimes they're quite senior, but they choose tools that definitely control their design process before it's even started. So do you think it's possible to make some kind of maybe AI that...
I think it's awareness as well. Like, it's not... and yeah, of course, yes, that's the fear. What we're actually talking about is that fear, that there is no need, there's no hand on the tool needed anymore. It's always been the fear of watching this change. Okay? And it's going back to the guy talking about the hand pencil paper, like that is a tactile holding thing. No, of course it is possible, and that is what we're running. That goes back to that same question about pivoting as well. Is your awareness of your tool enough to control it? And if you can't understand your tool, then you're not going to control it. So there's just and that can mean different levels of control for different people. So I think, yeah, of course.
It harkens back to the days of the master craftsman, doesn't it? Somebody who's experienced well enough in their trade can turn their skills to other things, but if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, but if the tool becomes the master craftsman, then you don't need one anymore. That's the discussion. And I think, and the assumption that it's, by the way, I'm no religious person when I talk about this idea of that. I'm the exact opposite. It is actually us exerting control in a premeditated way at this end before it happens. Because what you'll end up with, read all the articles about the work from home, read all the articles about people doing automated processes, read about how unhappy their lives are. They're all defined by family at that point. Work becomes a non-creative endeavour in whatever that is. And I once sat through a lecture from a judge in the High Court who claimed that being a lawyer was the most creative profession, and we spoke about it for an hour and a half. It was really boring, but apparently it was creative, and I took objection to it at the time. Everyone sees their role in what they do as creative, even the accountants. Some are more creative than others, let's face it. So I think on the whole, that's the bit. What do you get from your work? And why can't we focus as a group what we're targeting to get, so we get to control the tool so we feel creative, as opposed to just let it build itself up into this mess where there's no control. And I think that's part of the difficulty, because at the moment the government's running a thing about copyright, because they're looking at copyright adjustments. There's a group of organisations that are advising that panel, of which I'm advising one of the groups that's advising that panel. And from the point of view of why that's happening, that's should have happened 7 years ago. And it goes, and part of that is the AI copyright issue that was being raised before. And it's ahead of regulation, if you like. And it's something that needs to be, it's not something I do, but at least someone is starting to try something, but it's a slow grinding wheel, and this stuff's moving faster.
It's always going to be playing catch up, isn't it?
Oh, it is, yeah.
On that, we do need to close this morning. Thank you for the 2 questions. I'd like to thank our panellists again, Daniel Flood, Costa Gabriel, Andrei Dilnikov, and Christopher Pinn. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us this morning. Thank you very much again to Chaos and to Digistor and to StormFX for hosting the event.